time once again for Community Forum, and we are very lucky to have with us live in the studios this morning Nadine Cloete. Nadine Cloete is a filmmaker based in Cape Town. She is in Seattle to debut her first feature-length film and the world premiere of the new action Comandante, the story of the South African freedom fighter Ashley Kriel. Nadine, thank you very much for coming in and spending time with us this morning.
Thanks so much for having me. Yeah, it's great to be great to be in Seattle.
So, start out. Tell us, what was your motivation in producing your new film?
Yeah, I think, look, growing up, I'd always heard the name Ashley Kriel, but I didn't know much more than, this was someone that had died for freedom. I didn't know where he grew up. I didn't know his values and, what he had really been through. And then when I started interning for a local production company in South Africa called Rainbow Circle Films, they had they had done historical documentaries as well, and then there was archive footage of Ashley kind of on their drives, right? And when I saw the archive footage of him addressing a crowd, I was really just like kind of chilled up and down my spine and thinking, oh wow, this is him. And how could someone as charismatic and passionate as that kind of just be forgotten, in South Africa? Because he's known, in his inner circles, but nationally it's kind of out of the conversation. Yeah. And
so did you hear about him from when you were just a little kid?
Yeah, because my dad was a history teacher, so you'd always, because when we drive through Athlone in the area where Ashley was killed, my dad would mention his name, so it was kind of always in my head. Yeah.
All right, so talk about the area where he grew up in, the Bountiful,
yes. So, okay. Bountiful is a very interesting space because I'm sure you know about South Africa's forced removals, right? And that was when the Group Areas Act came into place and people had to live in areas that were designated to specific races, right? So South Africans were divided into blacks, coloreds, whites, Indians, and a gentleman last night asked me to explain what this colored thing is, and it's a derogatory apartheid classification. Colored people are part of all black people, but the government obviously divide and conquer, right? So colored people are mixed race people, to just put it simply. And basically, Bountiful was in an area that was known as a so-called colored township. And what's interesting about Bountiful is that when the June 16th uprisings happened in Soweto, Bountiful was the first community to kind of stand in solidarity with that. And the June 16th uprising is obviously when youth decided to stand up against Bantu education that was being given to them. And Bantu education is obviously an education that to keep you working class, and it was interesting because what the government wanted to do, one of our languages in South Africa is Afrikaans, which is a very complicated history. And the students in Soweto then stood up against being taught in Afrikaans. Obviously, it wasn't their mother tongue at all, and I think the point that the government wanted to do was, once again, to keep them at a certain level being taught in a language that you don't understand. And what was interesting is that Bountiful, where Afrikaans is the mother tongue of most people, then stood in solidarity with Soweto because they felt that they felt that this is some kind of oppression. So it wasn't about the language for them, but they realized, they were, in the 70s in Bountiful, black consciousness was very popular, and, everyone was shouting black power. And that's when Bountiful kind of started burning as well. Students would march, and someone was also killed there in 76. A young student was shot by police, a stray bullet. So Bountiful itself is a very, very interesting space that Ashley Kriel was born into. Yeah.
And his mother was an activist that affected his trajectory?
Yeah, and the mother is also an interesting history, for what I've been told. At first, listening, in other parts of the interview that didn't make the film, she says that when she started attending these meetings because the neighbors were attending these meetings, she didn't really know what it was about. But later, obviously, you get to learn. And through her attending meetings, Ashley would also attend meetings. Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting community. It's one of those communities where neighbors are like family. So, you constantly in and out of each other's houses and conversations. So if there's one politicized family next door, it ends up spilling over, and everyone being influenced. Yeah.
So the community is much tighter there than like here in the U.S. where we're spread out and
yeah, it's a very tight knit. Back then it was a very tight knit community. Yeah.
So talk about Ashley growing up. It seems that your film picks up about where he's starting to go attend what would be early high school for us.
Yes.
So, and he's right away, it looks like he's very active in the school government.
Yeah. He also, he had told somebody that, if politics is a way of life, then surely we have the right to say how we want to live. And that was, I really don't know where he was getting all these ideas from. It was from attending these rallies, being really young, or from being with his mom and the neighbors and so on. And one issue they had at the school was that there weren't enough textbooks. And then he started the first rally around we need more textbooks. When he was just 13 years old. And look, his father was also murdered when he was 6 or 7 years old, which I think was something that also really affected him.
No, was his father active as well?
Not that I know of. No, not that I know of. Yeah.
Okay. So he's representative on the school. Is that when he starts doing, because you have film footage of him speaking before a crowd of young people.
Yeah.
And that blew me away by how young the students were and how active they were. It was amazing.
Yeah. Actually, it was quite popular, outside of politics as well. And he used his popularity to get people involved, And yeah, actually in the footage that you see is about 17 years old. It's not, 16, 17 years old, quoting Mandela at that time. And people just, because someone told me that, they would know that Ashley would be somewhere, so they would go because he was this popular kid, and then through him, then just be influenced and conscientized. And also in the film, he understood these high levels of theory, right? Marxism, Leninism at an early age, but then would manage to put those teachings in kind of everyday situations. So that's why the one character says, when he listened to Ashley speak, Ashley would be speaking about his parents, and his community, and that made him, easy to identify with. And that's what made him such a leader, I think. Yeah.
Now, in that area of South Africa, there was a lot of gang activity then, and he and his friends came out with an alternative to that. Was that before he got active in his school or during that?
Yeah, I would say it was during that time. Gangs were always an issue, but kind of operated differently to how they do now. Actually, they started. They had this Bountiful action committees, and they would actually encourage gangs to, try and join the fight against apartheid, according to my knowledge. And there were times where one of the characters, also described to me that they would go try and shoot the gangsters, So they were very active in trying to remove these things from the community.
And they created Gap.
Oh yes. So Ashley was part of a group called Gap, which was the names of, the first letters of him and his friends. So Gavin, Ashley, Paul. They started Gap. Which was kind of like this alternative to joining the gang. I mean, this is when they were really young, before they even joined the youth movement. And I think that was something positive for them, that kept them from falling into the negative elements in the community. Yeah.
All right. So talk then more about, so he's active in school, and then his trajectory starts getting more and more what we would call radical.
Yeah.
So what was next?
I mean, he's active, so... And as a member of this Gap little group, they joined the Bountiful Youth Movement. But the Bountiful Youth Movement the leaders of the Bountiful Youth Movement were actually part of the African National Congress at that time. And so through the Bountiful Youth Movement, that's how Ashley comes to join the ANC, which was, at that time banned by the government. And then... So he becomes popular. He eventually gets thrown into the military wing of the ANC, which is Umkhonto we Sizwe, because they felt that, at first he was part of, the passive resistance, pamphleteering, speaking out, and then felt that just wasn't working anymore, and then had to go into some other kind of level of resistance. Yeah.
And I got the impression from watching the film that he wasn't really waiting for any orders or direction to come down from the AMC. He was pretty much calling the shots himself on what he thought was best to do.
Yeah, what was interesting about the MK unit that formed in Bountiful was that they formed by themselves and then contacted the ANC. Usually it works the other way around, where you would be recruited by the ANC. So, but the group there, they had their own levels of consciousness. They had been politicizing themselves through the Bountiful Youth Movement, been reading up on various things happening in other countries, various liberation movements in other countries, and learning through that. So they were, they were kind of ready by the time they went looking for the ANC. Yeah.
And you also include numerous people who were involved with him, both family members and then members from school and his intimate group members.
Yes.
So amazing people there. Talk about that.
Yeah. Well, some of them are kind of on camera for the first time. What was difficult about the interviews was that, next year Ashley would have been, next year marks the 30th commemoration of his death, right? But speaking to people, it's almost like these events happened just yesterday. And, I think about that, and then I think some people in South Africa say, they are sick of the apartheid stories and we must get over this. But, it's also like, how can we get over something that we don't know the truth about, and that people haven't had the opportunities to tell their stories and to be heard. I think people just want to be heard and to be acknowledged. And also the fact that they gave their youth, they did not have a normal youth at all. I don't think it's something that they regret, but I feel it's something that we have to kind of salute, as a nation. Like his family, they were great. They were really supportive, but it was kind of difficult to, gain the trust at first. Interesting thing about them is they wanted to know a lot about me, like who am I and my personal life, which I thought was fair enough, because now, to many people, Ashley is this struggle hero, but to them it's their brother. It's a totally different relationship. Then the same with people that I had interviewed. But an important thing for me was when somebody said that they were so happy that it was one of our people telling the story, and that's something that's stuck with me through those 5 years. I think that's what kept me going, was that someone had said that to me. And that this is a story really being told from the inside out, because I feel like I'm part of the community that Ashley was trying to conscientize, right? I'm not someone necessarily, I mean, I'm not the age group, but, I feel like I am still telling it from the inside out and not this outside in look at things. Yeah, and there were some interviews I feel still now very close relationship with and a deep respect, because I also wasn't aware of any of these things before I started the film. I went into the film like really naive, but in a way I feel that naivety was a good thing, yeah.
So you have at least two of his sisters, I believe, in the film?
Yeah, he only has two sisters, yeah. And they're both in the film. Ashley was the middle child, so older sister, younger sister. Yeah, it was really difficult for them, and especially now with, in Cape Town, the film kind of has brought up a lot of things, and his name is starting to make being in the papers again, and I think that's something that they're really happy about, but at the same time, it's also very traumatizing because, his killer received amnesty and at the TRC, so for them it just brings up all that over and over again, and it's something really difficult to deal with. Yeah.
And were both of his sisters, I believe at least one of them was active in the movement as well.
Yeah, there's actually a shot of it, I don't know if you see, but yeah, they would attend rallies, but they didn't go as deep as Ashley did with Umkhonto we Sizwe, obviously. Yeah.
And one of the things they were planning while he was in high school, I believe, were days of action.
Oh, yes.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so there's a scene where they describe what a day of action would be, and so there are 3 high schools in Bountiful, right? And each high school would have an SRC, which is a student representative council. And so the heads of the student representative council would have formed this thing called BISCO, which is the Bountiful Inter-Schools Congress. And Ashley was the head at his school, right? And then they would kind of get together and plan these things and plan these days of action, which meant that the school would kind of cause chaos. But see, it was this, they would cause chaos to make the statement that they do not approve of this Bantu education that they were being taught. But also beyond, they were against corporal punishment at the time, Bantu and all those things that included, so obviously police would be called, but now because the action was happening at all 3 high schools at the same time, it would be difficult to contain. So it was just like this community spirit that was insane. And then obviously in the film, you'll see while that's happening, other things are also happening. So it's almost like the action at the school is a smoke screen while other political activities are taking place. So to just keep, to kind of contain police activity in one spot, yeah.
And these either then or eventually turned into very serious actions. He even was going so far as, I believe, to writing how to make petrol bombs on the walls of schools.
Yeah. I mean, that's very radical, but it was, I think they were just they got so sick of, the conditions that they were being forced to live in and not being able to say, but this is what we want. And being, violence enacted on them on a daily basis, and not just physical violence, but poverty as a violence. It was ridiculous. I mean, and for example, Ashley's mother having to raise 3 children, and she was just what they called a tea girl, which means serving tea in a factory, which obviously, I mean, I don't even know how much you would get paid for that, but obviously very little. And that was, the conditions of many households in working class communities. And so they also had to pay rent. They weren't owning their own houses. They weren't allowed to, and fighting with council and for, electricity, water, upkeep of houses. So the students were fighting for many things, and and then went on to violent means. because and going back to that point that all those things that were being done with violence on them, especially, including the way they were classified. Yeah.
Right, and you include that in the film multiple times about the different leaders pointing out that they're not violent people. They're being forced into this from the conditions that they're suffering.
Yeah. I was watching the film and thinking, oh my gosh, this is like maybe a bit too radical, but also to understand that they weren't just throwing stones anymore, and that also when they did things, it was with a clear political consciousness. Yeah.
So another element that you weave into the film are these communications from the government and or intelligence agencies, noting where Ashley is at different points in time. When did he start getting on their radar?
I think it was because Ashley was starting to speak at public events, right? And he became very popular. And at the same time, he was active in the ANC underground. So that became very dangerous for him to be such a public figure and then also to be operating on the underground. And that's when he started becoming a target, because he was very good at conscientizing youth. And obviously that was something that the then apartheid government wouldn't want. He became a target, life on the run. Very sad, young teenager was happening.
And eventually having to leave the country?
Yeah, and eventually having to leave the country for multiple reasons. By the time he left the country, he was already part of Umkhonto weSizwe and already part of one of their units. And then he left the country because his life was in danger, and that meant whoever he was communicating with, their lives would also be in danger, right? And also then his unit also needed access to arms, and that's why, for all these reasons, it was best for him to leave the country. Yeah, and then to go to the training camps that the ANC had set up in Angola and Lesotho. Yeah.
And how long was he there for?
He was there for about 2 years. Training for 2 years. Yeah.
And then at some point he decides that he needs to come back.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so he sees some of his comrades in the camp, and then, well, the thing is, I think with Ashley also, he always believed that the fight was back home, and not in the camps. And then he had grown quite close to a big South African figure, Chris Hani, at that time. And then there was this argument with Chris Hani and Joe Slovo as well, whether to let Ashley go or not. And eventually they decided to let him go. I think he had grown so popular in the camps as well because of his influence, because of the way he spoke, also of jovial character, being able to... But jovial, but also very disciplined. And then they let him back into the country. Yeah.
And many of his former, well, and they're still his friends, but people he had worked with almost didn't recognize him when he came back.
Yeah, exactly, because they describe him as this lean, thin figure, and when he comes back, he's muscular, obviously because he's been training in the camps. Yeah. And, he was... Obviously, I'd graduated to being some kind of commander within the MK units, yeah. It's also like, you can't tell somebody else what your position is because it's so secretive.
But clearly he's now a target. He was a target when he left, but now he's even more of a target.
Yes. And I think it's just an unfortunate... kind of series of events that, I don't know how the police had caught wind of the fact that he had come back into the country, but obviously that happened. And then what happens is that then they start looking for him in places where he hid out previously, and then they find him at a safe house that he used before he left the country. And unfortunately, I don't know, things happened, and he was still... in this house when the police found out he was there. Yeah.
Can you talk more about what you now know of what happened that specific day?
Yeah, basically, what's interesting about the way Ashley died or was, killed was that So the water was shut off in the house where he was killed, right? The water was shut off. So the person he was staying with obviously calls the municipality and complains about this problem. And then it's very interesting that the police show up to the house in a waterworks van, which means either it was a setup or the phones had been bugged, right? And that's the reason why Ashley opens the door, because if you're in hiding, why would you open the door for anyone, for just anyone? So, well, I don't know how things happen, but basically there's this two versions, the police version of events where they say they knocked on the door, Ashley opened the door with, you see this in animation, Ashley opens the door with a gun hidden under a towel, and then a scuffle breaks out and they try to arrest him, and kind of the gun goes off and he's shot in the back with his own gun. This is according to police. But according to forensic evidence, also if you shoot somebody close range, there should be a bigger hole in the clothing, and there was a small hole in his clothing. So events couldn't have been the way they described. And also at the TRC, the sisters describe how they go into the house after he was killed, and there's blood on the walls and blood on the floor. So the animation that we create is really according to the sisters' versions of what they saw in the house. Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing animations that you've brought into the film.
But I think now also just to let people know that we have this special investigating unit in South Africa called the Hawks, and because of all the hype around the film, the Hawks are now reinvestigating Ashley's killer, even though he received amnesty at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission.
And you include archival footage from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in the film.
Yes, I do. We have a Department of Justice that still keeps all these tapes. So I got permission from the Department of Justice to use it. It's quite something to see. And also at the end, you'll see his killer, Jeffrey Benzine was known for this method that he used called the Witbag method. That's how he tortured people. And you see shots of him demonstrating this Witbag method. It's basically ties put your head in this water, and before you're about to, suffocate, he loosens you up. Yeah. He didn't just, he wasn't at the TRC just because of the murder of Ashley, but also because of the way he tortured other people in the struggle. Yeah. Yeah.
So we are just about out of time. We're talking with Nadine Cloete, who is a filmmaker based out of Cape Town and director and producer of the new documentary film Action. Is it Comandante or?
Yeah, you can say Comandante in Afrikaans, okay. Comandante in English, yeah.
The untold story of the revolutionary freedom fighter Ashley Kriel. And your film showed last night, but it's also showing today at 12:30 at Seattle International Film Festival.
Yes, it is. Yeah, and last night was the world premiere of the film. So it's really exciting for that to happen in Seattle.
And you'll be at today's showing as well?
Yes, I'll be there.
For a Q&A afterwards.
For the Q&A afterwards, yeah.
Which is always my favorite part of attending SIF events.
Yeah. It's also interesting to see how, different audiences reacting to it. So, I like that participation. And
then it goes from here to its first showing in South Africa when you get back?
So on the 3rd of June, it's showing in Cape Town, South Africa, where Ashley was born. And that show's already sold out. So South Africans are really excited to see this film. Yeah.
All right. Well, with that, we are unfortunately out of time. I want to thank you very much for coming and spending time with us this morning.
Thank you for having me. It was great.